Welcome to the Rich Report, a podcast with news and information on high-performance computing. Today, my guests are from the OpenFabrics Alliance. We have Jim Ryan, who's the chair, and Rupert Dance. He's from the Interoperability Working Group. So, gentlemen, welcome to the show today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
You bet, you bet. Well, I've brought your slides up. Why don't we start with that, and I'll save my questions towards the end.
Because people won't know voices, I'll say that my name is Jim Ryan. I'm the chair of OpenFabric. And Rupert, please do chime in whenever you want to provide additional detail or depth as required. Let me just quickly say that OpenFabrics has been functioning for about 8 years. We started life as an organization focused on InfiniBand with the mission of developing a single interoperable software stack for different vendors of InfiniBand components so that users would take some comfort in avoiding vendor lock-in from what were then some fairly small vendors of InfiniBand. And this was initially for Linux. The next thing we did after that was to expand our focus to include Windows. The next thing after that was to do the same thing for iWarp. And then in the last couple of years, there's been an effort to develop something called RoCE, which stands for RDMA over Converged Ethernet, which was a specification developed by the IBTA. So those three transports are now all supported within what's called the OFA software stack. We do a great deal of work in maintaining the OFED stack, including receiving code contributions, managing the content for the release process, the testing process, and a hugely important piece of what we do is the interoperability testing that is managed by Rupert at Software Forge, who chairs our interoperability working group and also chairs kind of an analogous compliance group within the InfiniBand Trade Association, IBTA. Rupert, was there anything further you wanted to say about that?
Perhaps later, Jim, when we get into it, but I'd like to reserve it for when we talk about the distros and how we've now included all of the distros in our interoperability testing. So I'll let you get to that section.
Absolutely fine, Rupert. I just want to make sure people understand up front, and we can help with the messaging later on, that without interoperability, I don't think we have OpenFabrics. It's that important to me. What we call the OpenFabrics Software, or OFS, is intended for high-performance RDMA-based applications. We have a great record of success for this in the high-performance computing community, and we're in the process now of reaching out to the enterprise data center as we're seeing understanding and adoption of RDMA becoming more popular and prevalent. We now see it being used in some areas in the business community where high-performance computing is especially important. Financial services is oftentimes given as an example because of their tremendous need for low latency. Oil and energy is another area of focus, and so on. So we're seeing those areas that most value it make the quickest adoption of it. If I move on to the OpenFabrics Alliance itself, our fabric technologies provide RDMA performance to include legacy gigabit Ethernet, as I mentioned before, iWarp, which is over Ethernet, of course, RDMA over Converged Ethernet, RoCE, as well as InfiniBand running at 10, 20, and 40 gig. For those of you who can see the slides, we have a diagram on slide 4 that shows how InfiniBand and iWarp coexist in a very common structure, such that an application developed by anyone will work without change depending on the transport. The applications are completely transport agnostic. We've worked very hard to make that the case, and a lot of what Rupert does in the way of testing is directly based on proving that value proposition, that the application can be transport agnostic. We realized that we had to make some changes a while ago. We have annual workshops in the spring, and at the spring of 2011 workshop, we really had some focused direction from the members that were there at the workshop, that there were some long-standing problems with how we packaged and distributed OFED that just plain needed to be addressed and resolved. We were making it too difficult for people to get functionality in a timely fashion from OFED through the distributors to the end users. We were making it too difficult in working with the Linux kernel in terms of how we would submit and manage code, leading to variations in functionality between the OFED code and what was in the Linux kernel. we just had let this go on for too long. So we took their direction seriously in spring of 2011, and we put together a small team, and we engaged with the leading Linux distributors specifically, and this is largely Rupert's work. I don't want to take any credit for it. And we just got down to it. What is it that we're doing? How can we do it better? How can we begin to shift the reliance of end users from needing to download OFED and deal with packaging issues and make it easier for them to rely on the leading Linux distributors with no more loss of functionality than necessary and with as much consistency as possible in code between what was in OFED and what was in the Linux kernel. And I'm very happy to report that operation has been successful. We have fundamentally changed our packaging and distribution of OFED. We now strongly encourage people to make use of the Linux distributors, while at the same time, for those who do need to get access to the OFED stack directly, we do have some such users. We've made it easier to find the code that's there. We've improved naming conventions and a number of things so that they can get access to that code directly and easily. In terms of the elements of the change themselves, we've changed as I mentioned, the packaging and distribution. We've changed the interop testing that Rupert does, so we use later versions of the distro releases so that the functionality, again, is as current as we can make it. What's called the Enterprise Working Group is now pushing all of its development work into the kernel. OFED contains all the RPMs that are needed to deploy functionality, and we're basically working to ensure that the end-user experience out of the box going through the leading distros is what it would have been had they gone to OFED and dealt with the packaging and distribution issues themselves. So as a result, we now can claim improved relationships with the distros, realignment with the upstream kernel, and greatly improved documentation. The result of having made these changes is that the end users are now seeing some significant benefits. The OFS releases now are directly available from the leading Linux distributors, and this drives quick release functionality and much less time required for redundant testing. The time delay in getting leading edge functionality from OFS to users, as I'm explaining, is greatly reduced. And because of our close alignment with the Linux kernel releases, we simplify the release management of OpenFabrics overall, and this leads to improved testing overall, including specifically interoperability testing. Rupert, would you like to add some of the things you've been doing in interop testing?
Sure, I'd love to. So, as Jim has said, we worked both with the distros, meaning people like Red Hat and SUSE and other people, to make sure that our process now is that we push all of our code updates to the Linux kernel. And that way, when Red Hat or SUSE or whoever puts together their distribution, it's coming out of kernel.org. We've got one consistent code base, and therefore we're much better in sync with the entire community. Because what was happening in the past is that the OpenFabrics Alliance was creating their own package called OFED, which was our OpenFabrics Enterprise distribution. And we'd sometimes be out of sync with what was currently being distributed in Red Hat or SUSE. And users that had installed from one of those distros who then tried to install OFED, we'd see package conflicts. So now, because we're all pulling from the kernel.org, we're all consistent. And the benefit that had in terms of the interoperability program is that we have included testing of the various distributions in our interoperability program. In the past, we used to basically take a core Linux platform, we'd install OFED on it, and we'd test all the devices. Now we've greatly expanded the hardware in our cluster thanks to people like Intel and AMD who have contributed equipment to that effort. And so we have a series of machines that will, for instance, have the latest Red Hat version installed on. And we have the latest SLES 11 versions installed on. We also test CentOS, Scientific Linux, and, of course, Windows. So we'll have anywhere from, say 4 to 8 nodes with each one of these operating systems installed. And the benefit is that we're not testing OFED, but we're testing what the distribution, what Red Hat and SUSE are actually providing to the end user. So the benefit goes both ways, frankly, because we get to test and make sure that all of our software is working properly within the distros, but the distros in turn get to see what problems we may have when we install their operating systems, and we're looking for RDMA functionality. We make sure that we give them the feedback about any problems that we experience. Because one of the benefits of this RDMA software stack that we provide is that it gives us the ability to run many upper layer protocols. And so we're testing things like SCSI remote protocol, we're testing ISER, we're testing NFS over RDMA, SDP, UDAPL, and MPI, and we test all of these upper layer applications on each one of the installations. So we're making sure that all these things work, whether it's on Red Hat, whether it's on SUSE, whether it's on Windows, Scientific Linux, it doesn't matter. We make sure that they work in all these situations. So the end result is that we're doing much broader, much more heterogeneous interoperability testing, so that not only are the devices validated and the RDMA functionality is validated, but that functionality within each distro is validated, and that feedback goes back to the distros and as needed goes back into the kernel.org fixes. Any problems that we find, we feed back, and that gets back into the kernel. So it's we had a workshop in Monterey in March. All of the major distros attended that, and we're all very much working together to improve all of these products. And as Jim said, I think it's been a big success. So I think that's the highlights of the program that I'm working with. The program, I should mention, is administered at the University of New Hampshire Interoperability Lab. We have approximately 40 nodes now, and we have one of the other benefits is that all of the vendors from both InfiniBand, iWarp, and Rocky provide all of their latest hardware, so that we have one of the most diverse, heterogeneous clusters probably in this country. And, for example, we've got all the latest FDR equipment that has come out, all the latest iWarp RNICs, and so we test all of that equipment against one another. This isn't just heterogeneous where we're testing Intel to Intel. We're testing Intel to Chelsea and Intel to Mellanox to make sure that all of this equipment works well regardless of how the end user decides to deploy the equipment.
And if I may, Rupert, importantly, the conclusion of all this is to be listed as a logo list beneficiary and basically certify that you have passed the interoperability testing. So there's a real business benefit to the companies that participate in this interoperability testing.
Yeah, that's a great point. And one other point along with that, Jim, is that we have a very detailed test plan that's about 130 pages long. It's open source. It's available to the entire community. You can download that from our site, and you can run these tests yourself, validate these results. We track, when we do the testing, we track the firmware that we use, the operating systems, the version of the OpenFabrics software that we're using. So you can go back, and if you're putting a cluster together, you can use this list to say, okay, what do I buy? What's been tested? What's been validated? And if you put together your new cluster based on the results that we provide, and we do this every 6 months, you can have a high degree of confidence that your cluster will go together smoothly and work well.
So, Rich, that's pretty much the story. Do you have any specific questions for us?
Yeah, for sure. Rupert, that sounds like a very expensive proposition to run a lab like that. I mean, the vendors are giving you hardware, but how do you fund the operations? Does that come from OFA?
Yes, the OFA does support this whole interoperability program for the benefit of their members and, in fact, the entire end-user community. So The University of New Hampshire, just so you know, their interoperability lab has other consortiums. They do a lot of work with Ethernet and wireless, DLNA. They've got a 32,000 square foot lab, so they've got a very fine facility for us to host these events. And we bring in the engineers from all over the country and, in fact, all over the world. We get people from Europe and Asia and, of course, the United States that attend these test events.
And Rupert, I mean, you have what you said, 40 nodes, that kind of thing. Are there big differences from with clusters that have tens of thousands of nodes, like out at the labs? Do they find problems that you didn't run into?
They can, and in fact, we're working on a collaboration with Lawrence Livermore National Lab to use their Hyperion cluster, which has 1,000 some odd nodes, so that we can do large-scale testing as well as the individual testing that we're doing now.
And it seems to me remarkable, guys, that you got the Linux distributors to do this in, it sounds like about a year time frame. What was in it for them?
Well, some of the major users that we have out there, some of the national labs, for example, will only ever take OFED functionality through a distributor. So they would clearly constitute large customers for the leading distributors. So for them to deliver a materially better version of OFED to these leading users by virtue of us just working together a little more intelligently is, I think, a very compelling value proposition. They had to put in significant time and effort, and for which we're very grateful. We also had to rethink our processes pretty fundamentally. And I actually had a quote that they gave presentations at the Spring Workshop, and the person from Red Hat said, quote, "OFED stuns us," quote. We just all decided we could do a better job together, and once we realized that and committed to it, the path forward just wasn't that difficult.
And one other point I might make is that now what we're doing is that we're pushing our latest software releases. For instance, you know, when we come out with FDR for InfiniBand, we're pushing that driver to the kernel.org, to that community. They test it, they validate it, they accept it, and then it's available to the distros. So the benefit to the distro is that they're getting that validated, tested, latest release drivers. They're getting it more quickly and being able to distribute it to their end users. And I think on another point is that we're better in sync in terms of time and distribution of our packages. In the past, OFED might have some newer leading-edge drivers that were in it that were not in the distros. So the end user never knew whether they should go to the distro or they should install OFED. Now it's all the same. We're all pulling out of kernel.org. We make sure it goes there first. And if we put together an OFED package with some, new technologies in it, for instance, we're still pulling all the core stuff from the kernel, only what's been accepted into the kernel.
Well, terrific. Well, kind of a wrap-up question here, guys. You've changed the way it operates. It sounds like it's working. Where to from here?
I think in terms of what we're doing with the OpenFabrics stack, we have done a lot of good work there. We are improving some of our processes around Windows as well, where we're seeing heavy reliance on OpenFabrics. I think we will probably shift focus a little bit into additional training areas moving forward. I don't want to say that the problem is completely solved. There's more that we need to do, but I think we're on the right track. We won't have to invest as many cycles in the basic blocking and tackling of OFED moving forward. But we are trying to make RDMA, kind of more approachable and easily adopted by mainstream data center managers and so on. And to do that, we feel that we've had to improve training and documentation on how to program to RDMA as well as how to manage and administer these systems. And fortunately, Rupert, again, is key in those areas. He's driving the creation, basically identification of need of this kind of training, as well as the creation of the actual training content in conjunction with a small team that he leads.
And I might add one other thing is that, the OFA is moving more and more. RDMA software is getting more and more adopted into the enterprise community. So one of the things that we intend to do is we need to do more testing with Rocky that Jim mentioned before, the RDMA over Converged Enhanced Ethernet. And one of the other things that we're going to be more involved with is Microsoft, who I'm sure your listeners know have made a major commitment to RDMA in their new Windows Server platform, the Windows Server 8. Some of their core functionality is based on RDMA now. So Microsoft is very much on board with us. This isn't just a Linux effort. We're very much, we've got a whole Windows distribution for the OFA software, and some of the major players, as I say, Microsoft, Oracle is very heavily committed to InfiniBand as well. So we're going to engage those people more, do more testing with them, and continue to make our software better as time goes forward.
Well, terrific, guys. Well, Jim Ryan and Rupert Dance, I want to thank you both for coming on the show today.
Our pleasure. Thanks for this opportunity.
Thanks for having us.
You bet. Okay, folks, that's it for the Rich Report. Stay tuned for more news and information on high-performance computing.